This conference will now be recorded.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Norval. It's a pleasure to be here, especially for the 100th webinar for you. I wanted to start by saying, in addition to some of the background that Norval went through, I spent about 10 years in industry, and that really fueled my passion for what I'm going to talk about today. As most of you have probably experienced in your career, we go through different training, and for me it was the Six Sigma Black Belt training and Lean training that we would go through and do within our organization, which was great training, but oftentimes we were doing it for the sake of training, or we were selecting Six Sigma projects that weren't necessarily based off of what the company really needed and what were driving the long-term goals and vision of the organization. And so that's where Hoshin Kanri really comes in. It's also often referred to as policy deployment or policy management, but it ties in the long-term vision of the organization, and it's a way of driving all those the goals for the future down to how we run and manage our day-to-day activities within a company. And so today what I want to talk about are the basics of Hoshin Kanri, what it is, how we can use it to really accelerate our Lean and our Six Sigma efforts, and link those to the strategic goals of an organization. That way we're really spending our time and efforts on process improvement and continuous improvement in a way that are more meaningful to the people that are involved in those efforts, but also in a way that are going to really help propel the company and the organization as a whole to becoming more effective and more competitive. So what we'll talk about is how we can cascade those strategic goals into the daily actions and metrics throughout an organization. As quality professionals, you're probably very familiar already with Lean and Six Sigma. Lean really drives waste elimination, focusing on what's of value to the customer through improving flow and being more efficient in terms of responses. Six Sigma is a great way of reducing variation in a process through problem solving and statistical tools. Both are excellent tools, they're very powerful, and in my mindset and how I've used Lean and Six Sigma, I think it's really more appropriate to combine those so that we have a toolkit for an organization so that we can address all sorts of process problems. In some instances, we need to really look at flow and organization. So Lean tools such as 5S and value stream mapping are appropriate. In other instances, we really need to understand what's happening within our processes because we don't know the sources of variation, and this is where Six Sigma comes together. And so combining these tools and really having a methodology where we're selecting the appropriate tool is essential in terms of using our employees and our process improvement events more effectively as well. And so this is where tying Hoshin Kanri in with Lean and Six Sigma is more about making sure that we're selecting the appropriate tool and we're holding the right Kaizen and process improvement events. So what we need is a strategy that combines Lean and Six Sigma as a methodology of deploying our strategy throughout the organization. What we want is more of that business management system so that we can strive towards world-class excellence and customer satisfaction. And what we do is we're taking the voice of the customer as a way of determining what we need to do to improve our business and then striving towards achieving the quality, delivery, and cost in our organization by selecting the appropriate Lean and Six Sigma tools. And that's going to help us as an organization really achieve specific business objectives that we need to accomplish to become more competitive and involve all of our employees in the right continuous improvement events. And so as I mentioned before briefly, what I've seen happen often is that we do Kaizen events. They're 1 week out of every month the organization does those Kaizen events, and maybe this month is a 5S event, or this month is a value stream mapping Kaizen event. And we're doing the Kaizen events because it's something that we do to drive continuous improvement, which is great, but we're not necessarily picking the right tools, or we're not picking the right areas where we need to apply those tools. And we're doing it more for sake of okay, my department has to do a Kaizen event. I've got to sign up for a Kaizen event in my area this month. Okay, I'll do 5S because that's what we're doing, and I'll just do it in this area. We're not using all the tools together strategically to really make sure that we're picking the most appropriate tool for the month that we're doing the training on, or the most appropriate area within our facility, because we really just have to keep moving and we've got to sign up and take care of our responsibility. And so with our business system, if we link policy deployment or Hoshin Kanri as a way of driving our continuous improvement throughout our organization, then we're more likely to pick better improvements opportunities in terms of the Kaizen events and where we're going to focus those Kaizen events. So what we need to be doing is taking the voice of the customer, looking long-term at where we need to be as an organization by driving quality and timeliness of service, cost improvement, and customer delivery throughout our organization to drive the customer satisfaction, which then drives our sales growth. So policy deployment sits at the top of our house as a way to drive these metrics in terms of typically our key performance indicators are safety, quality, delivery, and cost. So as we focus on what's important to the customer, we drive those areas down through all of our aspects of our business, and then we're selecting the right tools, whether it's 5S, single minute exchange of dies, looking at our tack time, Kanbans, quality function deployment. We're going to select the right tools then and use our employees as the foundation of driving those continuous improvement efforts throughout our organization and select the most appropriate tools. This is where policy deployment really comes in, because it's a way of looking at our business 3, 5, 10, hopefully more years out to see where we need to go to be more competitive and to satisfy the customer's expectations not only now but in the future, and then drive our process improvements so that they're achieving those goals long term. What I've laid out then is more of a deployment roadmap of how we can take Hoshin Kanri policy deployment as a way of looking at our future goals throughout our organization. Where do we need to be, again, strategically in 3 to 5 years so that we're selecting our different process improvement events to achieve those goals. And we're not doing them just for the sake of it's our week of the month and we need to do a Kaizen event. So with Hoshin Kanri, which I'll talk about today, is a way of then taking those 3 to 5 year long-term goals throughout the organization. So what I'm going to start with is looking at kind of the overall roadmap and then drive through how we would go through step by step of these. So Hoshin Kanri provides the goals of the organization. Value stream mapping then is a great way of laying down the foundation of where our current processes are, and then looking at our future state maps of where do we need to be to make sure we're competitive in 3 to 5 years, and then performing our gap analysis to see what do we need to do for our improvements to make sure we're achieving those goals. And that's where we have our bucket of tools like 5S and Six Sigma and standard work, visual management, total productive maintenance, are all things that we need to really pick from to make sure we're selecting the right tools when we talk about our Kaizen events. And so we're using that gap analysis as a way to look at the difference between our current state and our future state to pick the right tools. As we go through and do this, we're also deploying our different training events, and we're selecting our Kaizen events not based on, well, we haven't taught 5S in a while, we should probably go back and do that. It's more based on a higher or macro level value stream map to see where we need to really focus our efforts and what does the organization need so that we can drive that training throughout our organization. Our first step with that is starting to deploy the formalized training. This is something that, particularly for medium and large size organizations, will take some time, as well as if you're doing Kaizen events 1 week out of the month with 6 to 8 people per team and maybe 4 or 5 teams for your Kaizen event. This will take quite a bit of time to really drive it through a medium or large size organization. So starting out initially with deploying the formalized training on Lean and Six Sigma, and also then incorporating implementation projects with each of those events. And that will start helping the ball rolling with getting the process improvement efforts throughout the organization. While we're deploying our lean and continuous improvement and Six Sigma projects, in parallel, we can start developing our Hoshin Kanri or our policy deployment. This is where the higher level individuals within the organization, the C-suite, are getting together and really looking at what are the strategic organizational goals. And this is typically where that upper level of management is getting together several times a year to look at that strategic plan, to look at what's happening with the market, with the competition, what's happening with changes in technology and the environment, so that they can look at what needs to be happening for the organization next year, but then also 3, 5, 10 years down the road, so they can drive that change throughout the organization. And so this is where Hoshin Kanri really helps with capturing those strategic goals so that we can take those throughout every level of the organization, down from upper level management to middle management, who will oversee the process improvement events, and then all levels of the organization that will be implementing process improvement events. So it becomes part of those daily activities. With step 3, we're also looking then at what are those value stream mapping activities from the macro level, higher level portion of the organization, where we need to really address key issues within our organization. And when we start with the higher level value stream maps, we can start identifying other areas for improvement and drive those down into those lower level value stream maps. And so using value stream mapping really 2 ways. First, to get the big picture of the organization, but then also driving it down to where do we really need to focus our efforts and do those key detailed value stream maps of individual processes. That helps us to start identifying the gaps using our Kaizen burst, so we can look at our future state and how we should design lean flows, and then wrapping that back to our strategic goals of our organization so that we can make the improvements in those key areas. And that really drives our gap analysis of our current state and our future state, linking those to our strategic goals of our organization so that we can prioritize our Kaizen bursts, using the information then from our strategic goals and the direction our company needs to be moving in. In step 5, then, we start performing more of those Kaizen events. So initially, it's more focusing on, in step 1, how do we just start doing some of the basic training? And typically what we start with is standard work, 5S, and value stream mapping, really because we want to drive consistency and understand what our baseline is. After that, we've got our macro level, so we can drive in with our value stream maps, drive where we need to make those changes, whether it's future lean events or it's our Six Sigma projects. But we have a better idea then of what's happening within our organization. So what I want to do now is switch over to talk more about Hoshin Kanri. I think most of you have probably had quite a bit of experience already in the lean tools and within Six Sigma. And the key difference here is Hoshin Kanri, or policy deployment, and how we can really use that aspect so that we're making the most efficient use of our Six Sigma and our lean projects. And typically when you talk about Hoshin Kanri, you'll see a lot with compasses and driving directions. Hoshin Kanri is a way of taking that strategic vision and really driving the direction for the entire organization. So we're all focused on the same goals and making those improvements so that the company is more competitive, more efficient. This all starts with strategic thinking. And this is really what we're trying to do when we talk about Hoshin Kanri, is be more strategic in our process improvements. When we talk about strategic thinking, we've got to go back to more of the quality thinking, which began in Japan before 1645. The most common book that's referred to when you're talking about Hoshin Kanri is a book by Miyamoto Musashi, and it was a guide to samurai warriors. The book was called A Book of Five Rings. It talks a lot about hi-ho, which means strategy. When we think about policy deployment, it's strategic thinking, and it's really about what is that strategy that you're using as an organization. Now, while the quote might seem a little different here, if you think about the audience it was originally written for with the samurai warriors, the quote from the book is, "If you're thoroughly conversant with strategy, you will recognize the enemy's intentions and have many opportunities to win." Well, we're kind of doing that with our businesses, right? We've got to figure out where are we better, where do we have weaknesses. If we think about simple tools like SWOT analysis, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, this all ties into what we do for a business strategy. And if we can understand where we have opportunities for improvement, which is our continuous improvement efforts, then we can become more competitive. So we're taking that same philosophy and we're driving that down to how we run our businesses within our organization. And Hoshin Kanri then is a way to capture those strategic goals. This is where organizations that use Hoshin Kanri and use it well as part of their management philosophy are really taking where they need to go as a company and driving it into their daily activities. So we talk a lot about the targets, where does the organization need to be, and then the action plan so that we can achieve those targets. Hoshin Kanri is about planning where we need to go and deploying those efforts. So taking that back a little bit more to the beginnings, Hoshin Kanri itself was became more of a topic in the 1960s, 1965-ish, as we started changing statistical process control and focusing more on total quality control. So it was a change in how Japanese businesses really looked at how they managed their entire organizations to more that quality philosophy. You'll often hear, as I mentioned earlier, Hoshin Kanri referred to as policy deployment or policy management. When we look at the core terms with Hoshin and Kanri, Hoshin means shining metal, compass, pointing the direction. And this is where organizations, it's wonderful to work for a company that you know exactly why you're working on a task or a project and what it's doing for you and the company as a whole. Where Kanri means the management or control. So this is getting management involved to really drive the direction of the organization. So it's more of a systems approach to how do we manage change and get everybody on the same page. So typically, you hear metaphors such as herding cats. This is what we're trying to avoid. We don't need to be herding cats if we understand the direction of the organization and where we're trying to go. So we're going to use the Hoshin Kanri methodology as a way to really focus on our critical business processes and then take those into our two levels of our management or our strategic planning and how we do our daily management activities. And what Hoshin Kanri does then is, because it's going to be cascaded throughout the entire organization, our business goals are going to be linked to all of our daily activities, our projects, and so we're all working in the same direction. We're focusing more on the processes, and it really ties in a lot of Deming's philosophy of, because we're focusing on the processes and not tasks, it's bad processes that we need to improve. And so we can really drive the breakthrough thinking on process improvement events. The phases of Hoshin Kanri that I'll go through are often tied to Maslow's hierarchy, and it's kind of switching that a little bit in terms of how do you change your organization rather than looking at it from a personal standpoint of what do you need. Maslow's hierarchy looks at, people need shelter and safety and food. For an organization to be successful, we really have to move through phases. We can't start with just the target focus of this is what I need to achieve. We need to go from that to driving process management and then self-diagnosis within the organization of how do we understand where we're at as an organization, and then how do we start aligning everyone throughout the organization so that we have that one core vision. as an organization, what do we want to be best at? What are we striving for? So there's 5 key steps within Hoshin Kanri. We're going to start by measuring the system performance, and I'll go through each of these in more detail. In step 2, we set the core business objectives. Where do we need to go? In step 3, if we want to be competitive, we need to understand what else is happening out in the business environment with our competitors. In step 4, we provide our resources. This is where we start getting more into what lean tools should we be using. Where should we focus our Six Sigma projects? And then in step 5, we define our system processes so that we're aligned. So let's take a look first at step 1 with measuring the system performance. This is where, from an organizational standpoint, that upper level management would need to understand where do we need to be as an organization. Based on where we need to be in 3 to 5 years to be competitive, we need to look at what are those strategic change objectives that are going to get us there. And that's going to be part of what drives us later with our Six Sigma projects and our lean projects. Now, this is where it can be kind of interesting in terms of, as engineers and quality professionals, we like to use statistics, and this is where it's a little bit harder because our strategy is going to change over time. So we've got to be adaptable. As an organization, we're going to be changing, and our competition is going to be changing as well too. So what we lay out for 3 to 5 years is going to change maybe in 6 months or a year, depending on what our competition does. But this planning process is important so that you can, as an organization, start looking at what's happening out there. What does your business need to be accomplishing? And upper management can start planning for the right types of changes, and what they need to do to start changing the culture of the organization. This is something that's not done once a year or even, twice a year. This is typically done at least quarterly, and oftentimes upper level management has this on their monthly meeting schedules just to make sure that they're performing regular assessments to see what the competition is doing, and also internally how the organization is adapting to the changes that are necessary. So it's that continuous pulse of the organization from that higher level perspective that we're looking at this point. In step 2, we start setting what those business objectives are. In Hoshin Kanri, there's a term called Catchball that's used quite a bit. And it's essentially like tossing an idea around. What you're trying to do is then take what we just had from the strategic objectives and look more at those business objectives of what do we need to be accomplishing. If we look at the work of Kaplan and Norton and the balanced scorecard, this is important here because as we do Catchball, we want to make sure that our business objectives are not one-sided. We want to make sure that we're looking at it certainly from a financial perspective because that's important, but also from the operations perspective, the surrounding environment. There's all the different aspects that we've got to make sure that we've got a balanced approach to our business objectives and that we're not short-term just looking at profits and financial aspects. We've got to make sure that we're looking still at the market, our training internally, how we're driving our process improvements and how we're supporting internally our employees to make sure that they have the resources that they need to make sure that they're successful. So setting the core business objectives is a key aspect of really making sure that when we talk about our business objectives, that they're balanced. And the next step, we're evaluating our business environment. And this is where we really need to understand from an organizational standpoint all of management's customers. So these are our stockholders, our employees, our external customers, and then also what is happening with our competitors. So internally, we've got to think about different environmental analysis aspects, such as technically, where's the technological changes, what's happening from an economic, social, political aspects. These all impact how our business operates. So we need to understand currently what's happening in those areas. If there's also changes that are going to be occurring in the next several years with environmental regulations or government regulations, those are things that we need to take into account as well at this point too here. And as part of the business environment, our competitors. We need to understand how we're performing in different areas to our competitors. If we're performing better in certain areas, we need to make sure that we keep that advantage. If we're performing worse, well, these are key areas of improvement opportunities that we really need to focus when we talk about our different Lean, Six Sigma, Design for Six Sigma initiatives so that we can overcome those challenges and become best in class. So at this point, upper level management and middle level management would have a good idea of strategically where they need to go, what's happening in the business environment, and what our business objectives should be. The next aspect then is getting more into how do we provide the right resources. And this is, again, where we're really going to drive how do we select our Lean projects, our Six Sigma projects, and our Design for Six Sigma projects. Here, there's two key levels. We're going to take our strategic objectives, and then we're also going to drive those down then into our daily management. Back to Hoshin, what we're trying to do with Hoshin, with that alignment and pointing in the right direction, is align our system and how we manage our day-to-day activities and our process improvement events to those strategic change initiatives. And that way we've got alignment within our organization. And what's nice about this is when you're trying to get individuals to participate on a Kaizen event, for example, oftentimes in the companies that I've worked for, again, it's back to we do a Kaizen event 1 week out of every month. You've got to participate in at least one Kaizen event, so I've got to check my box. Well, that's hard to get people motivated other than they've got that requirement. When you can talk to people and say, I need your help on this Lean event because we're trying to make this improvement in the organization and how it links all the way up to the long-term strategic goals of the organization, it makes things a lot clearer and it's easier to get more people involved. And you're not doing the project just for the sake of doing a project, right? And so that's helpful. People like to know that what they're being involved in is going to make a difference for the organization they work for. So if we look at this as kind of more of a big picture of how all this comes together, when we use Hoshin Kanri, we're really getting more of that consensus throughout the organization of how we plan and we execute our projects, what we're really focusing on. So if we start with senior management, they're providing the vision for the organization. This is where we need to be in 3, 5, 10 years as an organization. This is what we're striving for. Middle management is going to be more of the strategy. How are we going to get there? So they're going to look at these are different types of projects that we should be focusing on. Let's make sure that we're picking the right projects that are going to get us where we need to go. Back to looking at even our value stream maps, they're going to look at those as part of our strategy of where do we need to drive our process improvement events so that we can reach that vision for the overall organization. And then our implementation teams, those individuals that are working on Lean Kaizen events or Lean projects, Six Sigma projects, Design for Six Sigma projects, they're the ones that are making things happen. They're taking the action to make those improvements. And so in the center of all this, our action, our vision, our strategy that all drives together is our Hoshin plan. And that's going to be the matrix that really drives how we make our process improvement events. What I'll take you through next then are the different Hoshin methods of how we really drive this through our organization. So we start with our Hoshin plan summary, our Hoshin action plan, our Hoshin implementation plan, and our Hoshin implementation review. So each of these are different charts and plans that we're going to put together to make sure that it's really clear exactly what we're working on and why we're working on those. So what I would like to do now is take you through an example so that you can see each of these 4 methods and then how we can really drive those through with our process improvement events. The example that I'm going to show you is one that I put together with a collaboration of multiple hospitals so that it's representative of really different aspects of how to organize a business and really drive those process improvement efforts together. So this might look like a lot on one sheet. This is typically referred to as the X matrix because it's got the big X in the bottom portion of it. But on this one sheet of paper, you can see a lot of what the organization is trying to do. And this really drives a lot of the communication down to the lower levels of the organization so we can see exactly why we're being measured on certain aspects and why we're working on different projects. So let me start by walking through this. The first step is to develop the strategic goals of the organization. This is where, when I talked about senior level management, focusing on where do we need to be as an organization in the next 3, 5, 10 years. So these are typically higher level goals for an organization. In this example, we have improve financial performance, be the community hospital or provider of choice, achieve total workforce engagement, and become nationally recognized for clinical excellence and quality. So we haven't set any goals, targets necessarily that are very specific. Here we're really just trying to identify what are those key areas of what we want to be known as. As we look at all of our improvements and where we want to be known for excellence in hospital care and in patient care. Okay? So these are giving us those strategic goals for our organization. What we're going to do next then is drive those strategic goals to our core objectives. What do we want to focus on as an organization so we can achieve those? So now we're getting a little bit more specific in terms of our core objectives. And so I'll read a few of these for you just in case. So one core objective is reduce hospital-acquired adverse events. This is where you go into a hospital for an illness and you end up getting sick with something else. Become the preferred employer in the region. So this is where people want to actually work for that hospital. And then another one is addressing community needs so that we're also taking care of our local community. So this is where we've taken our 4 core objectives and then we have, our 4 strategic goals, and we've developed several core objectives to meet each of these so that we're getting more specific in terms of what do we really mean in terms of improve financial performance or be the community hospital of choice. So as we get more specific, we're also using a way of making sure, since this is a matrix, that we've addressed all of these areas. So what we're using then are circles that are solid and then more of O's or circles that are not filled in. So I'll refer to those more as the dots as being the filled in circles and the O's as being the circles not filled in. When we talk about becoming nationally recognized for clinical excellence and quality, we want to make sure that we have core objectives that have addressed those needs. So when we look at that, one way that we're doing this with a strong relationship is reducing hospital-acquired adverse events and improving our quality, safety, and service excellence. Now we have other ways that we're also addressing this that have more of a medium relationship, such as become the preferred employer in the region and clinical documentation improvement. When we're filling in our matrix with our dots and our circles, what we're trying to really just make sure is that we've addressed everything fully. Similar to quality function deployment, where you're looking to make sure that there's a relationship in that relationship portion of your house of quality, we're doing the same thing here to make sure that we're addressing all of our strategic goals in some way to our core objectives. So there's a linkage between those. We can also start seeing where are those key areas that we really want to focus our efforts on. There's several of our core objectives that have all 4 of the strategic goals that are linked to them in some aspect. such as improved quality, safety, and service excellence, and our operational performance improvement. So this shows me where the linkage is and why I'm focusing on certain efforts. The next aspect is then my measures. Oftentimes we have key performance indicators, but we don't necessarily know where they come from. And this is where management would then take our core objectives and make sure that they're manageable and they're actually measurable as well too. So we would develop our measures so that we could start looking at our goals. And then we would link, just like we did before with our dots and our O's, we would use the relationships to make sure that each measure related to at least one core objective, and each core objective is also being measured. So for example, if we talk about operational performance improvement, it has one O and one dot, and the dot relates to 100% participation in lean events annually. So we have a measure to make sure that we're linking to that core objective. And then the last portion is giving ownership. So the ownership is typically given to somebody at the upper level, a higher level management, to make sure that there is ownership in each and every aspect of the core objectives. And in some cases, such as become a lean organization, everyone owns that aspect of it because they have their different departments or divisions that are reporting to them. So they own that responsibility of making sure that that's happening in their area. Whereas other aspects, when we talk about more financial, might go more in line with the chief financial officer. And so we've got different ways to make sure that everything has an ownership. When we take those core objectives down, then we're going to start becoming more specific. And this is how we're going to take each core objective into our implementation strategies and our measurements. So our Hoshin plan summary details more of the specifics about our core objectives. And these are typically related then to your key performance indicators, which for most organizations are safety, quality, delivery, and cost. And so I'll keep those consistent here. The first core objective was to reduce hospital-acquired adverse events. We would have management owners that would link back to our previous slide, and then we would have short-term goals and long-term goals. And in this example, I kept it simply for short-term is the end of this year and long-term is the end of next year. But that could be, looking at 1 month out and 3 months out, depending on the size of the project, or 1 year out and 3 years out. But you want something that's measurable that you're going to be able to track and show progression towards that improvement. The implementation strategies are where we're driving that down more in terms of what are we specifically going to do to make sure that we're reducing those issues. In this example, we have safety huddles and developing a sepsis protocol. The safety huddles is more a part of the communication. It could be part of your lean improvements in terms of making sure that there's visual management and that communication is clear and concise. With developing a sepsis protocol, at this point we're just talking about strategies, but it could be something that we drive down more into a Six Sigma project, because sepsis is one of those areas within hospitals that has multiple different sources of potential causes, and you're trying to control or reduce those. And then in the improvement focus side of it, on this matrix, we're using still the dots and the O's to show whether or not there's a strong or medium relationship. And if there's no relationship, then it would be blank. We're going to drive that down with our Hoshin plan summary to our Hoshin action plan. So this is a way that we're going to take our core objectives, and then we're going to become more specific with our implementation strategies. So here we have our core objective of reducing the hospital-acquired adverse events. We have our management owners And then this is also transferred down from previously. In this area, we're getting now into each individual department. So you would have a Hoshin action plan. In this case, the department's nursing. This could be another department within the organization as well, such as wound care. We have our team for this specific department, the date that this was done, and then when the next review would be, which is typically monthly. So what's nice about this as well is we started with the overall high-level strategy that's done more on an annual basis, but now we're getting into the specific daily operations. And here you can see, even in this example, that they're touching base every month to make sure they're still making progress. We're giving information on the situational summary of why this is important. So we're communicating that we're doing the huddles, the safety huddles, to make sure that there is good communication about patient risks, and we're transferring our knowledge off to the next set of nurses that are coming in for that incoming patient care team. We're driving our short-term goal from before with our 25% reduction. And then our long-term goal is in the 40% reduction, which would be by the end of next year. Our strategy would be to use standard work for how we handle our safety huddles to make sure that we're covering the correct information and the appropriate information each and every one. And then we would have our targets and milestones of what do we need to accomplish now, and then what else is coming up on our action plan. So this communicates within the team, but then is also something that's shared within the department so people understand what the process improvement efforts are, and what needs to, why this is happening. So similar to things like your A3, if you are very familiar with those from a process improvement standpoint, your Hoshin action plans would also be out there, whether it be as part of your key performance indicator boards or where you have your process improvement efforts with your A3s for Six Sigma projects and things like that. And what the Hoshin implementation plan then helps us do is start looking at what is our progress, what are those implementation activities that we're doing, what is our current state of this is what we've accomplished, what else is coming up in the near future. And it's a little bit more of a Gantt chart type format to give everyone an understanding of what the process is and what's been accomplished on the project. So with the Hoshin implementation plan then, we're looking at how we're driving that out over the course of our process improvement events. So we still have our team that we're taking down, who owns the strategy, so our team leader, the date that this was developed, or the latest update for it, what our core objective is, which is still reducing our hospital-acquired adverse events. We have our target of the year, which is 25%, and then typically what organizations do is they take that 25% and we're going to make slow incremental changes. So we're doing that over the course of a year. So every month we should be making about 2.1, 2.2% improvement. And at the end of every month, then this would go, you'd have your Hoshin Kanri review with upper level management that you would show all of your different core objectives. I've kept it simply here for the one core objective, but you would have one set of rows for each core objective within your department and where you're at in terms of your schedules and milestones for each of those measures. Back to that X matrix, there were about 12, 13 different core objectives. Every team or every department, depending on how your organization is set up, would have each of those 13 or 14 core objectives and their actual and target performance for each of those over the course of the year. And that way you're showing your trend in terms of how you're moving for performance. Are you on target to reach those? So that implementation plan, again, is typically presented to upper level management once a month so that they're aware of what the progress is within the organization, if you need help or resources to make sure that you're achieving those goals. Along with the Hoshin implementation plan is the Hoshin implementation review. This is where you would also present to upper level management where your progress is. If there's implementation issues, perhaps you need management support to get a mechanic on third shift to help do something, or you need some overtime, or you need to run a Six Sigma project and you want to make sure that you have support to have that resource to help you with that portion of the project. And so, along with tracking the performance on a month-to-month basis, management also sees what your action plan is. So there's two pieces of this. We've got the monthly report out to upper level management, but then from a team perspective, you're typically going through on a weekly basis and doing your own review with your key performance indicator boards to make sure that you don't get to the end of the month and it's time to do that upper level management review and you're not prepared. So you're making sure that you're making that progress throughout the month and driving that into your daily activities in terms of process improvement activities. And so hopefully you're seeing that whole progression of how everything cascades down from your strategy from a long-term perspective to your core objectives to how you're measured and then how you're driving your daily activities, and then you're picking your projects, whether it's Lean, Six Sigma, to drive your daily activities as part of your overall performance for your business. And so to kind of start wrapping up part of this is when we think about policy deployment, it's really part of the overall total quality management system. And it's part of that plan, do, check, act cycle because we're planning where we need to go. We're going out, we're doing those activities, we're checking where we're at, and then we're acting based off of those. And so our three main tools when we talk about policy deployment are really Deming's plan, do, check, act cycle, our cross-functional management because we're driving our strategic objectives based on the organization from a balanced perspective. And it's not just management controlling everything, it's how do we drive everything throughout the organization and across multiple functions. And then Catchball is a way of we're increasing the communication, whether it's our weekly reviews within the team that's cross-functional, and then also our monthly reviews with upper level management so that we're playing that catchball of understanding our business environment, what else is happening within our organization, and so that everybody really understands, what's happening within the organization. It opens those lines of communication. Now, it's a little bit different from the plan, do, check, act cycle. Policy deployment really starts more with the check cycle. So it's check, act, plan, do. You're checking the current status, and that really propels the Hoshin process because you need to understand currently what's happening within the business environment and where your organization is to really understand where you need to go. And so we're driving it down from a company-wide check aspect, and we're starting with the deployment of new targets and action plans so that we can achieve those. That also drives our cross-functional management aspect because we're continuously checking those targets throughout, whether it's product development or our production processes, between our weekly reviews within our team and our monthly reviews with upper management. So we're continuously checking everything and we're continuously communicating our targets and how we're getting there. So that also drives our catchball aspect because it's that continuous communication. We're developing our targets and our action plans, and then we're going through and making sure that we're able to accomplish those. And this all ties into our different feedback systems as we deploy these methodologies throughout our organization, because our feedback systems are going to look from the bottom up as we tell management, upper level management, this is where we're at, top down where management tells us, and it goes through this is where we need to be, but it's also horizontal, multi-directional communication as everyone works together to really understand where we need to drive their process improvement events. And as we go back and look at our house, our key aspect is that total employee involvement. Everyone understands where our long-term goals and objectives are, why we're working on different Lean Kaizen events, Six Sigma projects, because there's that clear linkage to the long-term goals of our organization. And it really helps then get everyone in the organization to the point where they understand how what they're doing ties into the continuous improvement efforts. Now, to do this, there's a few things that are critical for it to be successful. There need to be realistic performance measures. As we're going through these process improvement events, we need to see, slow incremental, or I shouldn't say slow, but incremental changes that are for the better. When we look at where we need to be in 3 to 5 years, it needs to be realistic as well, because it needs to be something that seems manageable to the employees so that we can drive those performance improvement events. In terms of how we're evaluating them, it also needs to be appropriate. So while we're driving our performance goals during implementation, they shouldn't necessarily be rigid. I mean, we're looking month to month at our monthly reviews to make sure that we're trending in the right direction. But there will be months that we have a lot more gains than other months where we might not have the gains that we hoped for. So the Hoshin Kanri process really helps you see that we need to be trending in the right direction, but we will have months that aren't as good as other months. So we need to focus more on measuring the results, not the activities and the number of activities, not the number of events. We need to really tie our improvements to the right measurements. And those need to be linked into those higher level performance targets for our organization. So to summarize it, Hoshin Kanri is a different way of looking at how we operate and how we select our process improvement events. It is a paradigm shift in terms of the overall company, and sometimes it might be a little bit counterintuitive, but it's important for management to really use this as a way to drive the direction of the organization to achieve those strategic goals, and also to really make sure that we're selecting the right Lean, Six Sigma, whatever we're doing for process improvement, to select the right events and activities so that we have that linkage throughout the organization. It's also important that as Hoshin Kanri is rolled out within an organization, that management is always there. Companies that do that use Hoshin Kanri and do this well make sure that everybody from upper level management is always there at those monthly reviews. And typically what organizations do then is they set it for a certain Friday afternoon within a month, and upper level management cannot travel on those days to make sure that they're there. It's important to show that this is where the organization is going, and so they've got to support it. And so making sure there's that constant involvement from leadership. I can't say that enough. Management has to be bought in. They have to understand how Hoshin Kanri is going to drive the activities within the organization. Well, let me start by thanking everyone for joining us today, and then I wanted to make sure I left enough time for hopefully a few questions.
Well, thank you, Beth. We do have time for questions here. If you do have a question, please use the chat box. It looks like we ran right up to the top of the hour, which is okay.
Yeah, sorry. I get a little excited when I talk about this.
We couldn't tell.
No. Oh, I've seen so many projects go wrong or so many Kaizen events fail because people aren't invested. They don't understand why they're doing it. So I get a little passionate.
All right, so we're waiting here. Okay, first question is, how long does it take to create one Hoshin plan?
That is a great question. It is something that if it's done correctly, is probably a good 6 months to a year to really understand the business environment and what else is happening. Now, it depends on the size of the organization, certainly, and and probably the type of industry. But for upper level management to really understand where they should be going and to do the appropriate strategic planning to start driving down what the appropriate measures are is easily 6 months for that portion. Now, to get this to where it's a well-oiled machine, where it's really running nicely, and everyone understands how to track their monthly performance and their weekly performance and have it integrated within their key performance indicators, that's a much longer learning process. So typically, I would say, several years to really get it done and done well. But that's where, again, making sure that everyone is adaptive initially. Great. So it looks like there's another question as well about communicating the need to top management so that we can secure a long-term commitment. That is one thing about Hoshin Kanri, is that it really needs to be driven by upper level management in terms of owning the strategic goals and making sure that they are available for those monthly presentations and report outs, and also initially in the key aspects of even the weekly reviews with each individual department, to help with those, to get those started. So management really is the key group that has to understand the value of Hoshin Kanri. And that's a lot of discussions with them so they can understand the long-term commitment of making sure it's successful. I'll also throw out there, I did include my email address in case there's questions after, if people do need to sign off and head back to work.
Yeah, and while we wait for maybe one more, there is another question. There we go.
Okay, great. So it sounds like we'll probably take this as maybe the last question, and then if there's anything else, people can email me. So this question is, in your experience, has Hoshin Kanri ever been used for culture change in an organization, and is the planning the same as for capital projects? So probably the biggest benefit from Hoshin Kanri is actually the culture change. And that's typically what you're seeing is how people then are driving their daily activities towards the change of focusing on continuous improvement. And that probably is the biggest benefit for it. And it would be somewhat the same. I think it would necessarily depend somewhat on your culture change, but given this audience and typically what you would be using this for, the culture change would be to be becoming more of a quality and customer focused organization and changing the culture to that. And Hoshin Kanri would certainly be doing that, because you'd look at what does your organization need to become in order to meet your customers' expectations, and then how do we make sure we have the right culture towards change and innovation that focuses on the culture as part of this to driving those continuous improvement opportunities.
Okay. Looking at where we are time-wise, I think we better make that one the last question for this time. Beth, any closing comments?
I just wanted to thank you for inviting me. Hopefully you could tell I'm passionate about this topic, so I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. And thank you for being part of the 100th webinar. I really appreciate it. And if anybody else has any questions later, feel free to contact me.
Great. And thank you, Beth, for presenting for us today. We're going to go ahead and get things wrapped up for now. Reminder that our next webinar will be after Thanksgiving. It'll be Wednesday, November 28th. It'll be the Kano model and the Net Promoter System with Therese Steiner of LexisNexis, who is an ASQ Dayton section member or section chair, I believe. So we'll be looking forward to having Therese return for another talk, and that'll be after Thanksgiving. Until then, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and hope everyone has a great rest of the day, and we'll hopefully see you online soon. Thanks again now. Bye.